Some corners aren't meant to be turned. Some steps aren't meant to be taken. And sometimes, the difference between being here and being gone is just 1 second, 1 heartbeat, 1 breath. Marcus Thompson had walked that same corner every morning for 7 years. Past the coffee shop with the chipped blue door, past Mrs. Rodriguez's flower stand, past the graffitied wall where someone had written, "Hope lives here," in fading yellow letters. It was Tuesday, October 15th, and the autumn air carried the scent of dying leaves and distant rain. He checked his watch, 8:47 a.m. 3 minutes later than usual. He quickened his pace, unaware that those 3 minutes would change everything. Marcus wasn't supposed to be ordinary, but somewhere along the way, ordinary had claimed him. At 34, he carried the weight of dreams deferred and promises broken. His marriage to Jessica had crumbled 2 springs ago, not in explosive arguments or dramatic confrontations, but in the slow erosion of silence. She'd moved out on a Wednesday, taking only her books and the small ceramic owl they'd bought on their honeymoon in Portugal. "You're always somewhere else, Marcus," she'd said, standing in their empty living room, her voice soft with resignation rather than anger. "Even when you're right here, you're somewhere else." He'd wanted to protest, to explain that his mind wandered because it was searching for something he couldn't name, something that felt just out of reach. But the words had stuck in his throat like dry bread, and she'd left with a gentle kiss on his forehead that felt more like goodbye than he'd realized at the time. Work at the insurance company had become a rhythm of gray cubicles and fluorescent lights. His colleagues spoke to him about claims and policies, but their voices seemed to come from far away, muffled by the invisible glass that had grown around him since Jessica left. He processed paperwork, attended meetings, smiled when appropriate, but part of him remained suspended, waiting for something to happen. His sister Amanda called every Sunday. "You need to get out more," she'd say, her voice crackling through the phone from 3 states away. "Join a gym, take a cooking class, do something." But Marcus found comfort in his routines, the same breakfast, the same route to work, the same corner where he always paused to let his mind wander before diving into another day of measured emptiness. The only unpredictable thing in Marcus's life was his journal. A leather-bound notebook Jessica had given him for his birthday years ago. In it, he wrote fragments of thoughts, observations about strangers on the street, imagined conversations with his father who died when Marcus was 12. "What if I just kept walking?" he'd written the night before. "What if I turned a different corner and became someone else entirely?" That Tuesday morning, Marcus had woken from a dream he couldn't quite remember, but it left him with a strange sense of anticipation, as if the universe was holding its breath. He'd lingered over his coffee longer than usual, staring out at the gray sky, feeling something shift inside his chest, a restlessness that was both frightening and exhilarating. As he walked his familiar route, Marcus found himself noticing details he'd overlooked for years. The way morning light caught the windows of the old apartment building, the sound of children laughing in the elementary school playground, the elderly man who always sat on the same bench, feeding pigeons from a paper bag. These small observations felt significant somehow, as if he were seeing them for the first time, or perhaps for the last time. Marcus reached the corner of 5th and Maple, his corner, the one where he always paused. But today, something was different. The air felt charged, electric with possibility. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of choice pressing against his shoulders. Straight ahead lay his office building, his desk, his predictable day. But to the right, down Maple Street, lay territory unexplored. A path he'd never taken in 7 years of walking this route. His phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor. "Budget meeting moved to 9 a.m. Don't be late." Marcus looked at his watch. 8:52 a.m. He could make it if he walked fast. Should make it. The responsible thing. The expected thing. He lifted his foot to step forward toward his familiar destination. But then something extraordinary happened. A paper airplane, perfectly folded from what looked like sheet music, drifted down from somewhere above and landed at his feet. Marcus looked up. No open windows, no children, no obvious source. The paper airplane sat there like a message from the universe, pointing down Maple Street. He picked it up. The music was handwritten, with notes he couldn't read, but that seemed to whisper of distant melodies. At the bottom, in careful script, someone had written, "Sometimes the music chooses you." Marcus's heart began to race. The responsible voice in his head screamed about the meeting, about his job, about maintaining the careful architecture of his ordinary life. But something deeper, something that had been sleeping for years, began to stir. He took a step toward Maple Street, then another. The world around him seemed to slow, each footfall echoing with significance. This was it, the moment he'd been unconsciously waiting for. The corner he'd stood at thousands of times was about to become the corner where everything changed. 1 second before he disappeared around that corner, 1 second before he stepped out of his old life and into the unknown, Marcus Thompson smiled for the first time in months. They found his phone first. It had fallen from his pocket right there at the corner, the screen cracked, but still glowing with that unread text about the budget meeting. His supervisor called the police when Marcus didn't show up for work. His sister Amanda drove 3 states to help with the search. The security cameras told a strange story. They showed Marcus walking his usual route, then stopping at the corner of 5th and Maple. The timestamp read 8:52:17 a.m. when he bent to pick something up, though the cameras couldn't capture what it was. At 8:52:31 a.m., he stepped toward Maple Street, and at 8:52:35 a.m., he disappeared from view around the corner. But here's where the story becomes impossible to explain. The camera on Maple Street, positioned just 20 feet from the corner, never showed him emerging. The police reviewed the footage dozens of times. Marcus Thompson walked around that corner and simply wasn't there anymore. The search lasted 3 weeks. They interviewed everyone in the neighborhood, checked every building, every basement, every rooftop. Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower stand said she'd seen him that morning, that he'd looked different somehow. Lighter, she said, though she couldn't explain what she meant. The elderly man who fed pigeons mentioned that Marcus had been smiling, which was unusual because he typically looked so serious. Amanda found Marcus's journal in his apartment, open to that final entry. What if I turned a different corner and became someone else entirely? The investigators treated it as evidence of intentional disappearance, but Amanda knew better. Her brother hadn't run away. He'd been transformed by something none of them could understand. In the weeks that followed, something beautiful began to happen. People started leaving flowers at that corner, not mourning flowers, but bright, living bouquets that seemed to celebrate something rather than grieve it. Children began making paper airplanes and leaving them there, hoping they might catch the same wind that had carried Marcus away. Jessica came to the corner once. 3 months after he disappeared, she stood there for a long time, and later told Amanda that she'd felt Marcus's presence strongly. Not the sad, distant Marcus she'd divorced, but the Marcus he'd been when they first met, full of wonder and possibility. A year later, the most extraordinary thing happened. A street musician appeared at that corner every Tuesday morning, playing melodies that seemed familiar but impossible to place. When people asked his name, he'd just smile and say he was playing music that had chosen him. The elderly man who fed pigeons swears the musician has Marcus's eyes, but Amanda, who visits every few months, says that's impossible. What's not impossible is the change that corner has brought to the neighborhood. People linger there now, as if something in the air encourages them to pause, to consider the paths not taken, to remember that every corner holds the possibility of transformation. The coffee shop with the chipped blue door reports that customers often sit by the window, staring out at that corner with expressions of longing and hope. Maybe Marcus Thompson died that Tuesday morning. Maybe he simply chose to step out of one life and into another. Maybe the paper airplane was real. Maybe it was metaphor. Maybe it was both. What matters is that somewhere between 8:52:31 and 8:52:35 a.m., a man who had been slowly disappearing for years finally found a way to become visible again, even if only to himself, even if only in whatever world lies around corners we're brave enough to turn. Sometimes disappearing is the only way to be found. Sometimes the most important step we take is the one that leads us away from everything we think we know about ourselves. If you've ever stood at your own corner, feeling the pull of the unknown, remember Marcus Thompson, and remember that some choices can only be made in the space of a single second. What corner are you standing at today? And what's waiting for you just 1 second before you decide to turn it? If this story moved you, let us know in the comments below. Subscribe for more tales of moments that change everything, and ring that notification bell, because you never know when your next story might find you. Until next time, remember, the most extraordinary destinations are often just one corner away.